Welcome to the Fax Machine and our 10th episode anniversary!
Woo!
Yeah! Alright, I'm here with Noah and Emily, and we're about to do what your parents told you not to do and have some fun with food. So we've all gone out and we found a fact about the things that we eat and drink that you might not expect. So we'll discuss our trivial morsels, and then I've prepared a quiz loosely inspired by the theme. Before we get started, just a reminder, check out our social media accounts on Instagram and Twitter at FaxMachinePod and on Facebook at FaxMachinePodcast. If you like what you hear, slide into our DMs. Yeah, I said it. I'm hip. And please review us on iTunes and Spotify. And with our first mouthful today, Noah, take it away.
This week I learned that the Catholic Church believes that God is not present in gluten-free communion wafers. It turns out that God is in the gluten. So, where did this come from? In 2017, a letter was released at the urging of Pope Francis in order to clarify the Catholic Church's position on gluten-free communion wafers. The gist? They don't like it one bit. Alright? This raised a serious spiritual and practical issue for Catholics with celiac disease, which is a serious autoimmune condition triggered by gluten that affects about 1 in 100 people. But it turns out that it's more complicated than the Church merely not being sensitive to the needs of its adherents. It's part of a host of issues over which centuries of wars have been fought, and ancient religions split in two. But it can be grossly oversimplified as follows. Should Christians be cannibals, or just pretend to be cannibals? So what do I mean by this? Catholics all around the world participate in Eucharist, also known as Holy Communion, the Christian ceremony that commemorates the Last Supper. This ceremony typically includes the consumption of bread and wine. Christian denominations often differ about the meaning and symbolism of this sacrament, and even whether it is symbolic at all. For example, the Catholic Church dogma is that during the Eucharist, the bread and wine offering changes into the body and blood of Jesus, in reality, with no symbolic aspect to it. This is known as transubstantiation, and according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, occurs literally in, quote, a way surpassing understanding. Disagreement over the ways in which Christians should refer to the nature of the Eucharist, as well as its theological implications, was a factor in the Protestant Reformation, and remains to this day one of the major points of contention between the Catholic Church and Protestants broadly, along with the inclusion of women as priests and the primacy of the Pope. So what does this have to do with gluten? The issue is the Catholic Church takes very seriously the notion of being, quote, in continuity with Jesus, who, according to the Bible, ate bread and drank wine at the Last Supper. Chad Pecknold, a theology professor at Catholic University, put it succinctly. Christ did not institute the Eucharist as rice and sake, or sweet potatoes and stout. But, not to criticize Jesus Christ or anything, but if he had passed around sweet potato fries and Guinness at the Last Supper, I don't think the church would have any trouble filling the pews. Just saying. So Chad goes on to say, it may be a small thing to people, but the Catholic Church has spent 2,000 years working out how to be faithful to Christ in even the smallest things. To be vitally and vigorously faithful is something which is simply integral to what it means to be Catholic.
So there's a shocking amount of tradition kind of around this one. I was looking up the Code of Canon Law that kind of dictates what can be used for not just the communion wafer, the bread, but also the wine. And I don't know if you're going to talk about this more, but the rules were basically it must be celebrated with bread and in wine to which a small quantity of water must be added. So wine, it's not enough that you have wine. You have to pour a little bit of water in. The bread must be wheaten only, recently made, so that there's no danger of corruption.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the wine must be natural from grapes and also not corrupt, which basically means that you can't add any preservatives of any sort to any of these things. Which was kind of a big problem for winemaking for a very long time, because if you didn't make wine regularly, then the wine would spoil quite quickly. And so historically, and I forget where this happened, but I think it was only really kind of formalized in the 1800s that, because people had already been doing it, for wine, you were allowed to add spirit alcohol that were distilled from grapes as well in order to preserve the wine better. But it had to be a reasonable amount. The quantity added had to be much less, and it may not exceed 18% of the whole.
Okay.
So they were very exacting.
Yeah.
Like not even like around 20, like 18%.
Yeah, 18%, no more.
Yeah, maybe it ties way back to Noah's first episode of, not you Noah, but biblical Noah's episode of getting drunk.
Yes.
That might have been 19%, and that was enough to tip him over the edge.
Yep.
You never know.
They learned from their mistakes. Yeah. But the question is, how can Catholics with serious conditions like celiac, who risk, real harm by ingesting gluten, continue to be, quote, vitally and vigorously faithful? It turns out there is a middle ground. So the 2017 letter from Pope Francis that started all this also said, quote, low gluten hosts, partially gluten-free, are valid matter, provided that they contain a sufficient amount of gluten to obtain the confection of bread without the addition of foreign materials and without the use of procedures that would alter the nature of bread. This is where the Benedictine Sisters of Perpetual Adoration of Clyde, Missouri enter the story. It's very exciting.
We've been waiting.
Yeah. After a decade of cutting-edge experimental baking, these nuns became the first community to produce church-approved low-gluten altar breads, containing just 0.001% gluten, an amount low enough for most celiac sufferers to ingest. In a 2004 interview with the Washington Post, Alessio Fasano, who was then director of the Center for Celiac Research at the University of Maryland, and who now directs the Center for Celiac Research and Treatment at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, said that one of the Benedictine sisters' low-gluten wafers contained such a low gluten percentage that someone with celiac disease would have to consume 270 wafers daily to reach a danger point. And Claire Baker, what a great last name for this topic, by the way.
Predestination right there.
Claire Baker, who is a spokeswoman for Beyond Celiac, an advocacy organization for people with celiac disease, said, quote, you'd have to be very devout or really excited about going to church to eat that much at communion. and maybe she underestimates how fun it is to go to Mass. But I like to imagine that any given Sunday, you'll be able to find Chad Pecknold, quote, vitally and vigorously digging into a packet of delicious church crackers.
I will say, I think there is a prohibition against consuming more than one Eucharistic wafer per day. And I'm not sure where that's written, but I feel like I've been told that. Like, in an admonishing sort of way at some point in my life.
I mean, they are good. I mean,
yeah.
like, full disclosure to the podcast, I am the only person on this podcast who wasn't raised Catholic. Mm-hmm. But I did go to an Episcopalian school, which is basically Catholicism with women.
Yeah. That's like...
it's effectively the same.
I mean, that's
it's like a gluten-free communion host.
Yeah. Exactly.
So close, but...
yeah, and I mean, I remember, I was like, I like this wafer. It's nice.
Yeah,
no, it's fine.
It's all right.
So I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just not having to be totally immersed in it for your childhood.
So here's that as well, but here's a question for you. When you consume them, do you chew them?
Oh, no, you like put them right on your tongue and they like half dissolve. It's nice.
Oh, see, that's I think why I'm averse to them, because I was always taught that to chew them is disrespectful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something just sit there.
Well, you're already
go back
eating
to your pew.
Jesus. You might as well just go all the way.
I mean, that's what, my argument as a small, child was always, well, why aren't the enzymes in my saliva like disrespectful to Jesus? And here we are today.
But actually, so I remember I went to Catholic high school, and I had this experience for about 15 years before I had it like enumerated by a teacher. But so in the Catholic tradition, you're not supposed to eat or drink an hour leading up to the Mass as a form of like bodily purification to prepare yourself to receive the host.
Jesus doesn't like match well with tacos or something.
Yeah, he doesn't pair well at all. But so this phenomenon happens where you like, and in modern times, I think you're allowed to drink water within an hour of the Mass, and then if you have a medical condition, it's okay to do whatever. But as a child, it was and I grew up in a very strict house, so there was no food an hour before Mass, and water was like very minimal.
Yeah.
And so you get there, and you're sitting there in this hot church for an hour, and you've got like cotton mouth basically, and then this guy hands you this piece of unleavened bread directly to your tongue, and like it sticks to your tongue, and you're just kind of sitting, and you're not allowed to chew, and you're like. And then it makes the transition to the roof of your mouth, where it will stay for the rest of the day. And you're just very slowly trying to peel it back off the roof of your mouth so you can just swallow it. The whole time being like, I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly. In some ways, it's maybe meant to capture the suffering of Christ.
But I'd made it years of my life, like just thinking this to myself, like not imagining that every person around me was going through the same thing. Just I thought they all knew what they were doing, and I was like, I'm a failure. And then my high school English teacher was like, well, back in my day, you had to wait 4 hours before Mass, so everyone went to the 7 a.m. Mass, so they didn't have to deal with that crap. And I was like, oh, that happens to you too? So there is another even deeper, or I guess more interesting Catholic argument that can be made. The fact that we're all kind of trained and training biologists makes it very interesting, because if you were to physically change the material, then you should be able to do genetic testing. Which first I'll tell you is anathema to even think this. and like
I think you mean heresy.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, yeah. But I mean, where does heresy end and anathema begin?
It's a great one.
But basically, you shouldn't have these thoughts. But if you did, like Damian Marzik and Mirren Sam did,
God.
PhDs from the Association of Raelian Scientists in Las Vegas, Nevada, they published a not peer-reviewed article about how there is a lack of human DNA in communion wafers. And this, I can only go on to say that this is extremely disrespectful to church wafers, but I'll leave it at that. That they collected samples at a local church, brought it back to their laboratories, and ran DNA testing.
Jeez.
No, that's a big no-no.
That's a big no.
Yeah. So as your fact was about holy carbs, I opted to look into holy and also unholy foods. So these are kind of, I guess I'll call them factlets, and that they're kind of like quick ones I'm going to shoot out that I thought were kind of cool. But holy foods, apparently, I didn't know this, but per Greek tradition, baklava is meant to have 33 layers of phyllo to symbolize the 33 years of Christ's life. Oh. Kind of cool. Also, pretzels have an innate religious symbolism underlying them as well. Although their exact history and origin is contested, the knot shape is generally thought to represent the shape of hands in prayer, while the 3 holes represent the holy Trinity, of course. And regarding unholy foods, so have you guys heard of ortolans? No. Okay, this is a creepy thing. But they're a somewhat unusual element of French cuisine. So they're these small birds that are captured during their migratory flight to Africa, fattened, drowned in Armagnac, which is a French brandy, and then roasted and eaten whole. And they're supposed to be very delicious and nutty and gamey and like a very fine staple of French cuisine. But part of the tradition of their consumption is that eaters will drape a napkin over their head. And while the reason for this is contested, one interpretation is that it's done to conceal the indulgent, disgraceful act of eating these tiny, delicious little birds from the judgmental eyes of God. So it's kind of like, if I just hide under this napkin, God's not going to know. And it's been illegal to capture and sell these birds in France since the 90s, but there's actually been a resurgence more recently to legalize it by a bunch of Michelin star chefs. And honestly, they do still cook them and kind of sell them under the table, or under the napkin, if you will.
All right, thanks, Noah. Emily, what have you got for us?
Every year, about 150 tons of tomatoes are thrown by roughly 20,000 participants in the world's biggest food fight, La Tomatina.
Ooh.
Yes, so La Tomatina is a festival that takes place in Buñol, Spain, a small town not too far from the Mediterranean coast, every year on the last Wednesday in August. So it occurs as part of a traditional week of festivities in Buñol, and in fact the first and unplanned Tomatina took place during such a week in 1945.
Yeah, just after a really bad play.
Something close to that, yes. So the accounts that I've read chalk it up to a scuffle that occurred between some parade marchers and spectators, which then spread through the crowd and now infamously drew ammunition from a nearby vegetable stand. So in 1946, the year after, some festival attendees seeking to reenact the previous year's festivities brought their own tomatoes from home and instigated another food fight, which continued annually on that Wednesday during that same festival. My favorite anecdote from La Tomatina's history, though, has to do with one of the few failed attempts to ban it. So apparently in 1957, festival officials sought to cancel La Tomatina, propelling protesters to stage a mock tomato funeral procession. in which they carried a coffin containing a giant tomato down the street in a parade that even featured a band playing funeral dirges to accompany them. So, needless to say, the message was conveyed, and now La Tomatina still exists.
That's some dedication.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, as you might imagine, the popularity of La Tomatina has inspired some spin-off events around the world. And in going down this very strange tomato-covered rabbit hole, there was one that stood out in my research considerably above the rest. So, it is the Colorado-Texas Tomato War, which is held annually. Yes. So, for our listeners at home, Noah is a Texan.
Howdy, y'all.
By heritage. Hey, he's wearing a shirt right now that says Houston on it. So I mean, it doesn't get more Texan than that. So yeah, I'm curious to see your reaction to this tale. Might inspire you to partake next year when they do it. We'll see. So the Colorado-Texas Tomato War.
Oh, I gotta say, this is important.
Oh yeah.
The thing is, actually, my sister lives in Denver. So this could actually be very, very exciting.
Okay, let's agree that if you go and go to it next year, please report back with how it actually is, because
definitely.
After you hear this, I think you'll want to, but I also really want you to already. Okay, so the Colorado-Texas Tomato War, it's held annually in Twin Lakes, Colorado, and involves hundreds of Coloradans and Texans battling it out over the course of 3 days of rotten tomato tossing. So it all started in the early 80s when an inn owner by the name of Taylor Adams organized it as a sort of outlet for her frustrated neighbors to take out their, frustrations on the Texan tourists that keep vacationing in their town.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
You suck.
You guys. So to give a rough outline of what actually takes place, the event begins with both sides gathering in a designated war zone on the first day, and then over the course of the 3-day skirmish, roughly 8,000 pounds of overripe tomatoes are pelted, tossed, whatever word you want to use, with the victorious side having the most survivors standing by the end. So they follow kind of, paintball or laser tag rules where if you're hit, you're out. So at a first glance, this just sounded like another lighthearted, zany local tradition, much like La Tomatina, which, for context, restricts participants to lobbing pre-squished tomatoes, so nobody gets hurt, and then just running around for a bit. But upon reading a bit further, and then even further than that because I couldn't stop reading because it's so crazy, it became evident that the combatants in the Tomato War approach it with a very real, but still patently ridiculous, warlike fervor. So, to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, an article that I read covering the 1984 war, whose slogan was either "Keep Colorado Beautiful, put a Texan on a bus," or "Colorado welcomes Texans with nuclear arms," depending on who you asked. This article described both sides laying landmines, so basically burying tomatoes, so if you step on one, you're dead, decking out jeeps in paper mache to look like tanks, and parachuting armed to the teeth with their trusty nightshades onto the battlefields. Rumors during that year spread that invading Texans are preparing to fly over and drop tomatoes out of Learjets, which they had done in the past on biplanes, as well as launching tomatoes from fleets of kayaks.
God damn it, I love my people.
Wow, this is just amazing. Also, Coloradans during this year anticipated their enemies, whose uniforms were white, having the advantage due to an incoming snowstorm and wondering, in quotations, whose side God was on.
Well, we're happy to answer that for you.
Yes.
This sounds like if you gave Wile E. Coyote a box of tomatoes, what would he do? Just
So another article I read documenting the 1987 iteration of the Tomato War describes a scene in which, in quotations, the vastly outnumbered Texans took refuge in an improvised fort they dubbed the Tamalamo, over which they raised their state flag. Coloradans charged the fort across the creek they renamed the Rio Grande. The wounded were tended to by battlefield medics equipped with Bloody Marys. I am not making this up, by the way.
Best thing I've ever heard.
Isn't this fantastic? But I will say that the tomato war as it occurs nowadays is a much more toned down and lighthearted versions of the battles of old.
Fuck that.
I figured you'd
My
say that.
sister and I are going in hard. We're gonna just. I don't
Bring
actually.
the glory days back.
I just realized I don't know what side she'd be on. I was just assuming she would be on my side, but honestly,
You're on opposing sides.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I might be tearing a family apart right now.
Yeah, I mean, but frankly, if it's anything like riding the back seat of our Jeep as kids together, she's gonna destroy me. She has the sharpest fingers poking into my sensitive little ribs.
I get more so mad as they're good at throwing tomatoes, but maybe that translates. So actually, the sort of watered down version of it now is probably in response to the brief hiatus that it had in the 90s, due to concerns that the recurrent damages and liability would make it hard for property owners in the town to actually be insured. But it was revived in 2011, and it's now strictly non-competitive. It incorporates nice things like live music and fundraising.
That is cool.
I will say that those who participated in the blood or maybe lycopene bath that it used to be look back upon it fondly. As per an interviewee in one of the articles I referenced above, in quotes, "It was a really fun time for everyone, even those who got killed."
Wow. So that's one of the best events that I think you could have found. It's a tough act to follow. I'll just mention one that I feel like I'm familiar with only because it makes it on the news every year on like the local sports channel, like blooper reel. But and I'm sure there are multiple of these in the world. But there's a Gloucestershire Cooper's Hill cheese rolling challenge. And the rules of this, and I think as I describe it, it'll be very familiar.
I think I've heard of this.
Yeah, I think I've heard of this too.
They have to outrun the wheels.
Some of the yeah, exactly. So there's a giant wheel of cheese. Some of the pictures are amazing. From the top of a hill, a 9-pound round of double Gloucester cheese is sent rolling down the hill, and competitors start racing down the hill after it. The first person over the finish line at the bottom of the hill wins the cheese.
Nice.
It's a high stakes race for sure. So the competitors are aiming to catch the cheese. However, it has around a 1-second head start and can reach speeds of up to 70 miles an hour.
Oh my god.
But so, unfortunately, because of the fact that a 9-pound wheel of cheese that's going at 70 miles an hour can cause serious harm to competitors and spectators, as of 2013, a foam replica replaced the cheese. The winner, when they won, actually received the actual wheel of cheese and not the foam replica.
Well, if they didn't, would they be worried about having FOMO?
Oh my god.
Guys, this is gold. Why are you laughing?
Just one last thing on tomatoes, though, because so tomatoes are a New World fruit, actually in the nightshade family, but they're from South America originally, and they were reintroduced back into Europe, and then they became a staple in Italian cooking and what we call marinara sauce, which is a tomato-based sauce. And so an interesting question is, do you know why we call it marinara sauce?
No. Is it something about Virgin Mary?
No.
The ocean?
Oh, good.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
So marinara, it stands for sailor sauce because sailors
good.
brought it
Ah, there we
back.
go.
So what you're saying? Semen.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. But yeah, it's from the Italian marinai, which is sailors. And so
that
the
makes
sailors
sense.
brought tomatoes back, and then marinara sauce was created, and that's where the name comes from. So I thought that was I thought they made a lot of sense, and so I wanted to share that as a lover of word etymology.
I like it. Very cool.
So you mentioned that tomatoes are a fruit, which of course we all know now. It's almost a cliche at this point to say that the exact botanical definition is that it is in fact a fruit. I maintain something different. That does it belong in a fruit salad? Should be the standard by which fruits and vegetables are judged, and the U.S. Supreme Court agrees with me. There was a Supreme Court case, Nix v. Hedden, in which the court ruled that under U.S. customs regulations, the tomato should be classified as a vegetable rather than a fruit. The court was unanimous in this opinion, okay? And I want to give you guys a second to guess. When do you think this ruling was issued?
So I think I know the ruling you're talking about.
There's literally nothing important happening. That's the real question. Oh my gosh.
I want to be pessimistic, though. I want to say that it might have been like 2000.
Oh, Rob. 1893.
Okay.
Really?
It was so
Okay.
long ago. This is an issue. I was shocked by this. I thought it was going to be like an issue of like children's lunches. I mean, that's what you always hear is that like the pizza in like the school cafeterias could technically
Right.
be considered
Count
as a vegetable serving because of the tomato sauce that was on it.
Right.
But this has clearly been an issue that has been, bugging people since the 19th century, which is amazing.
That's so funny.
All right, so apart from the food fights that I just told you guys about, as I'm sure you're also aware, people most commonly associate throwing tomatoes when they're rotten to convey displeasure towards a performance. The urban legend associated with this is that dissatisfied audiences at the Globe would pelt underwhelming Hamlets and Lears with tomatoes during Elizabethan times, but this is actually extremely unlikely since tomatoes weren't really even around yet. Actually, they make their first appearance in an English cookbook 150 years later. However, there are records of stage actors having been pelted with tomatoes over the centuries, and the earliest recorded instance of it is a surprisingly well-detailed account published by the New York Times in 1883.
Ooh, boy. I know this is going to be good. I love it.
So because I don't think I can paint the scene nearly as well as the author of this account does, I now present to you a dramatic reading of, quote, "An Actor Demoralized by Tomatoes," published in the New York Times in 1883. All right, so I ask you guys to visualize the scene that I'm now about to recite to you. John Ritchie of Hampstead, Long Island, aspires to be an actor and lecturer. He made his debut before a Hampstead audience at Washington Hall a few evenings ago. He had a crowded house and was warmly received. In fact, it was altogether too hot for him, there being distributed among the audience a bushel or two of rotten tomatoes.
Oh, boy.
The first act opened with Mr. Ritchie trying to turn a somersault. He probably would have succeeded, had not a great many tomatoes struck him, throwing him off his balance and demoralizing him. It was some time before the audience could induce him to go on with the performance. He next attempted to perform on the trapeze. As he lay upon the bar with his face toward the audience, a large tomato thrown from the gallery struck him square between the eyes, and he fell to the stage floor just as several bad eggs dropped upon his head. Then the tomatoes flew thick and fast, and Richie fled for the stage door. The door was locked, and he ran the gauntlet for the ticket office through a perfect shower of tomatoes. He reached it, and the show was over. Ritchie estimates his damages at $50 and vows that he will not give a performance at Hampstead again. I'd also like to mention that I tried to look into John Ritchie in terms of his acting career and could not find any accounts of him other than this incident. So.
Well, clearly he was demoralized.
Poor guy. He was demoralized.
Couldn't find any evidence of the fruits of his labor.
Or vegetables from your account.
Maybe he got hit with one so hard he was in a vegetative state.
Yeah, it sounds to me like he was sauced. All right. Thanks, Emily. So that just leaves my fact. And this week I learned that Jaffa Cakes, a small British confection, went to court in 1991 to be told whether they are in fact a cake or a cookie.
Ooh.
And so this is a big question. And for many of our listeners, you may not know what a Jaffa Cake is. And actually, I had never seen a Jaffa Cake, which is why Fax Machine provided Jaffa Cakes for everyone present at the recording of Fax Machine.
Ooh.
Yeah.
All right.
You get a Jaffa Cake. You get a Jaffa Cake.
We all get Jaffa Cakes.
But none of you at home.
You mind if I do the honors?
Go for it.
Oh, boy. This is difficult to open.
So the confections are jammed in pretty tightly. They are not coming out of the case.
I think
Some technical
go.
difficulties.
All right, I'm gonna get a butter knife. I'll be back.
So Jaffa Cakes are a biscuit-sized cake, as described by Wikipedia, introduced by McVitie and Price in the United Kingdom in 1927, and they're actually named after Jaffa oranges. Oh, and perfect. Emily is back with the knife.
I have returned.
All right, so we're gonna
Tools.
ply these apart and then each try one.
Oh, God.
I assure you, they're actually good.
This is carnage.
All right.
All right, here we go. Okay.
There you are.
So
All right.
you'll notice
Try to
a
get the
few
chocolate.
characteristics about your Jaffa Cake. Oh, thank you very much. And then there's like a flaky, wow, these are in rough shape.
They're normally not partially melted as they are now.
There's a chocolate covering. There's actually been a huge kind of separate discussion about which side is up. Is the chocolate side up or down? Which is a kind of ridiculous question, I think. So everyone take a bite.
Dry.
These are particularly dry.
Was it possibly an option for these to be classified as garbage?
So they're basically small, fluffy confections that have an orange taste in them. They're named after Jaffa oranges, which is where the orange flavor and actually the orange packaging you see comes from.
I mean, I don't like it, but I am going to eat a lot more of them.
So basically, these things, you might say they're just fluffy cookies. I think would be like if you had to describe it to someone kind of at first sight. And to us, like it doesn't really matter, right? Is this a cookie? Is this a cake? But you know who does make a big difference too?
Who?
The United Kingdom's value-added tax. Because the VAT, as it's known in the UK, is a tax that's payable on chocolate-covered biscuits, and that's the weird British word for cookie. So they pay this value-added tax on chocolate-covered biscuits, but not on chocolate-covered cakes. And so McVitie's, the company who makes them, was put in this position of defending the classification of a Jaffa cake as a cake, and it was done in a tribunal in 1991, where there was a prosecution basically saying, no, it's a cookie, and then the McVitie's lawyers saying, no, it's a cake, and like kind of going back and forth about what's a cake, really? Which I think has to be one of the most interesting like court rulings that I've ever heard of. Here are the criteria that were used to assess the product. The product's name was regarded as a minor consideration, so calling it a Jaffa cake doesn't mean that it's a cake, but it has some weight. The ingredients regarded were similar to those of cake, more so than of biscuits. The product's texture was regarded that of being a sponge cake. The product hardens when stale in the manner of a cake instead of softening in the manner of a biscuit.
Ooh,
yes.
Okay.
Which is, I mean, very contentious because if you've ever had soft-baked cookies, they also harden.
Oh.
I'm sorry, those cakes.
Oh,
but we can return to that later.
Okay.
A substantial part of the Jaffa cake in terms of bulk and texture is sponge. Whatever they mean specifically by that, I'm a little unclear. The Jaffa cake is more biscuit-sized than a cake. The product is displayed alongside other biscuits in supermarket aisles rather than other cakes. And the product is presented as a snack, eaten with the fingers like a biscuit, rather than eaten with a fork with a meal as a cake might be.
Also, if you're only eating cake at specific meal times and like with silverware, then you are eating cake wrong.
You're doing it wrong.
You are doing it wrong.
And so, after I forget how many days or weeks this tribunal went on, they ruled in favors of McVitie's and ruled that the product should be considered a cake, meaning that there was no value-added tax in the United Kingdom. Separately, in Ireland, their revenue and tax also had a ruling that said it was a cake for a completely different reason, because they said that their moisture content was greater than 12%.
Well, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, that obviously makes it a cake.
Yeah, duh. I don't know what they were thinking. And so this was just a really cool like food standards kind of question that had to be ruled on by a court, by like, you know, like licensed lawyers arguing over whether it's a cake or a cookie. And I want to briefly mention one other case, also in the United Kingdom, because it didn't matter here, but we all know perhaps there is a potato-based salty snack that comes in a conical plastic jar. Sorry, in a cylindrical plastic jar.
Oh, we're talking about Pringles.
Talking about Pringles,
Okay.
yeah.
Ah, okay.
Probably also Lay's Stacks with an X, if you've seen knockoff Pringles.
Okay.
But so Pringles, in the United Kingdom, this value-added tax also applies to potato crisps, or potato chips, as we would call them. And in the UK, Pringles wasn't paying the potato crisp tax because they said, no, we're just a savory snack. We're not a potato chip. And so this was an entirely different case that was ruled slightly more recently. And one of the reasons that they thought that they could qualify as a savory snack, which I found astonishing because I didn't know, they openly said, like, no, we can't be a potato chip. It's only 40% potato.
All right, what else is it?
It's all kinds of other like wheat and like soy and like
kind of
other
binding,
products. Yeah, and who knows what like maltodextrin and corn syrup. But they're like, yeah, no, that's not a potato. So it was a real...
Don't we have like 40% of the same DNA as potatoes or something?
We're probably 40% Pringle. So I have put together a quiz relating to playing with your food. I hope you guys do well. Good luck. Bon appetit. All right. Question number 1. The most expensive pizza in the world is sold in Italy, and it takes 72 hours to prepare. What order of magnitude is the price of this pizza?
Let's go in the tens of thousands.
That's what I was going to say.
Tens of thousands.
Yeah.
You are absolutely correct.
Yes.
It is $12,000.
Nice.
It is a
Just made
heart-shaped
it.
pizza made at Louis XIII in Salerno.
Oh.
The chefs begin the process of making the dough and toppings 72 hours before they serve it to you. They prepare most of them outside somewhere else, and then they do the final steps of preparation in the kitchen, and they deliver it to you hot and fresh. Service is included in the $12,000 fee, but it takes a team of 3 chefs 3 days.
What about it? I mean, like...
Yeah, is it covered in truffles? Like how?
It takes 72 hours because the dough is given ample time to rest before being made into the most expensive pie in the world. It is topped with bufala mozzarella, 3 types of caviar, lobster from Norway and Salento, and is lightly dusted with hand-picked grains of pink Australian sea salt from the Murray River. Okay, question number 2. Apples, pears, and plums are all included in what family of flowers? So like the clade order and family are all a type of flower that you'll be familiar with.
Is it orchid?
I don't think so.
Then I don't know.
Oh, it's so frustrating.
All 3 are members of the rose family.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That would make sense.
So order Rosales, family Rosaceae, genus Malus. And that is that's the typical, most apples fall into that genus.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Question number 3. Once used to hold and ship samples of a food product for one particular vendor is now the industry standard used almost any time you use that food product.
Carton.
An egg carton?
No, not an egg carton. Let me see. So I'll give you a little bit more detail. It was invented in 1908 by a man named Thomas Sullivan, selling samples from his shop in New York City, and he wanted to send them around the United States so that other people could sample his product. And now these little sample packs are the way that we deliver, or like the way that we use the product every day.
Tea?
Yeah.
Nice.
So
Cool.
that is Thomas Sullivan's tea trade, and he invented the tea bag.
Oh.
There we go.
He wanted to send samples of his tea to potential clients outside of New York City, and so he wrapped small amounts of them in tiny silk bags, but sent no instructions. And when they arrived, people who received them, some just started boiling the tea and putting the whole silk pouch into the water, and it would diffuse the tea out, and it tasted great, and they thought that was how it was intended to be used, and they sent letters back saying, "We like your tea, it tastes great, we really enjoy the tea bags you've sent us." And he said, like, no, that's not what they're for. And then he started realizing how popular it was, and he started making them out of cheaper materials, and that was kind of the birth of the tea bag.
Wow.
Yeah. And so before that, there were like all kinds of metal strainers, and you'd have it kind of like pulled out that way. But the idea of having a tea bag is actually so like disgusting to British people at that time that when British tourists came to America, they wouldn't use tea bags. And it took almost 40 years for tea bags to become popular in Great Britain because they were just so not used to it. But number 4, what common food product was used as a medicine in the 1930s specifically to treat indigestion and was called Dr. John Cook Bennett's Panacea?
Ketchup?
It is. Yeah.
Nice.
Whoa!
Yeah, it is ketchup. Yeah, it was called the tomato panacea, and a lot of really kind of like just overblown things were attributed to ketchup. What's amazing though is that ketchup, as we think of it today, it's like a tomato preserve, but ketchup actually referred to just any product that was preserved in a similar way, and so ketchup doesn't necessarily mean tomato ketchup, even as late as like 1900. And it was really the kind of the industriousness of Heinz, the ketchup producer, who made tomato ketchup, and specifically fancy tomato ketchup, something that was desirable. And so Heinz was the first person who kind of elevated food processing to like a reasonable level. And so that's why we have clear glass ketchup bottles, because Heinz was saying, I'm not trying to hide anything. My ketchup's all good. Because most ketchup before that was actually very low quality. And it was the kind of stuff that was written about it, like Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, and like the food processing industry. It was like very, very bad. And some ketchup was actually fatal, that it was so poorly made, and like some things had fermented in it.
Wow.
So Heinz was the first person way ahead of his time to say, we have food quality standards and our ketchup is the best ketchup. And that's why Heinz really has such a kind of dominant role in the ketchup marketplace, because it was the first and best ketchup for so long.
Wow.
Yeah, but it does not cure disease. Just to be clear. All right, question number 5. How many different flavors do you find in a box of Fruit Loops cereal?
5.
No, there's one flavor. They all taste the same.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, snap.
So Fruit Loops, despite having numerous colors, I think they have 5 or 6. Green, purple, blue, yellow, orange, and red. So 6 colors in traditional Fruit Loops.
Checks out. Those are all colors.
Nice.
Nothing gets past us.
Yep, but they all have the exact same flavoring. So it's just all artificial coloring to make your cereal look better. But there's one Fruit Loops flavor, and it's kind of a fruit blend. Question number 6. The creator of Chuck E. Cheese also famously invented what device for game playing?
That the claw thing? Where you like
Ooh,
you go
the
and
machines,
the claw grabs
like
the
the
toy
Toy
and
Story.
it drops the toy and that.
I'm being purposely vague when I say game playing device. I could, I guess, also say game playing system.
So this is video games.
Yes.
Oh.
Which I was unsure if I wanted to tell you at first, but now I feel that it's quite
So
clear.
the founder of Chuck E. Cheese invented a video game system.
Yes.
Also.
Mm-hmm.
Is it one that we would have heard of? I guess that's the whole point of the question.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think it's famous enough that you would have heard of it, and you wouldn't necessarily know the inventor.
Is it Atari?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's the Atari game system.
Wow.
And so, yeah, he was a big game fan himself. He liked to create games. He obviously was good and made Atari. But then at some point he said, I want to make like an arcade for young kids that they can like have like events at that's not full of like adult gamers. Mm-hmm. And so he created Chuck E. Cheese to be kind of like a kids arcade. Which is a really cool idea, and actually it still is. I would still go to Chuck E. Cheese, but that would defeat the purpose.
It's a really it's a really cool place for children to be forever tortured by the nightmare they experience watching animatronic rats play country music.
Yeah, it's not perfect. But so Nolan Bushnell was the name of the founder of Atari and Chuck E. Cheese, which got quite a nice resume behind him. And interestingly, he is kind of responsible for one other thing. I don't know if you guys have watched the movie Ready Player One.
No.
There's a very important scene in which the Atari game Adventure is played. And Adventure was the first game that had an Easter egg, which is a hidden kind of gem that you can uncover in the game, which has big metaphorical meanings in Ready Player One. But the Easter egg was if you found a little dot and carried it back to the start screen, you would get the name of the creator of the game, which was something that Atari actually did not allow. So game makers' names were not in the game anywhere. And so the creator of Adventure snuck his name into the game as an Easter egg, as like a stick it to Atari to say like, I made this and you can't stop me because I'm a better coder than you are. All right, question number 7. In M&M's, what do the M's stand for?
Oh, it's
it's Mars and something, I think?
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No.
Well, we give up.
All right, so M&M stands for Mars and Murray's.
Oh.
Okay.
Mars and Murray. Murrie, Murray's Chocolates, and Mars of Mars Bars, the chocolate company. So Mars and Murray, creator of M&M's. All right, and now we are on to question number 8. In 2013, the UN encouraged people to increase their consumption of what animals? Because there were 1,900 edible species of this general type of animal, and it might be a way to combat global hunger.
Insects.
It is insects.
What?
Yep.
Wow.
And so they said, there's so many edible insects on Earth, you should consider eating more. 2 billion people eat a variety of insects already, and they gave some recommendations for good bugs to start with.
Well, let's hear them.
What do we got?
And so this is a list of recommendations in Creepy Crawly Cuisine by biologist Julieta Ramos Elordu. And so she's a proponent of the entomophagy movement, or the eating of bugs. And so she recommends, I'll just go through the list, many varieties of beetles, butterflies and moths, bees and wasps, ants, grasshoppers, crickets and locusts, flies and mosquitoes, water boatmen and backswimmers, and stink bugs.
Oh.
Or basically all the insects. Well, nice job on the quiz, guys. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in for our 10th episode of Fax Machine. As always, please check us out on social media at Fax Machine Pod on Instagram and Twitter, and Fax Machine Podcast on Facebook, and drop us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or any other platform that supports our podcast. I'll leave you with one piece of sage advice, that knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. And can reach speeds of up to 70 miles an hour.
Oh my god.
I think they're just
faster
milking
than I
it.
thought.
I think...
I see you.
Oh no.
I see you.
It was so late. I was looking at my notes, but I got it.
I am utterly disappointed.
Oh, God.
You are really milking that joke for all it's worth.
Don't have a cow, Emily.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, cheese.